Hello. Welcome to the Lost State Recordings Podcast.
Hi there, my name is Trey. This is the Lost State Recordings Podcast. Today on this episode, this is a topic that I have been interested in and I think is an important conversation to have in the grander scheme of the music industry and artists who deal with this on a daily basis while they're touring. Basically, what we're talking about is the rising costs for touring acts going through venues in the United States and also in other European countries, the increased costs of venues taking merch cuts on shirts, sometimes other merchandise that they don't feel is valid to take a percentage of just for providing a space during the show to sell that merchandise. We're going to delve into how some people will argue on the venue side that, things increase. We do live in a capitalist society, so costs of things do go up, so they have to make up the difference of lost revenue in certain ways. And then also that bands, most of the time, the money they make is just from merch. A lot of the ticket sales, sometimes they'll make some money, but a lot of those guarantees are not really very high in general. You'd be surprised from some of the guarantees that I've seen from bands I know touring. So we're going to dive into this topic and figure out maybe some sort of fair compromise. Maybe like the industry can find a way to combat these costs where bands feel like they're being taken advantage of, and maybe work on a better deal with the actual production of the show, maybe like ticket sales or, something like that. So we're going to dive a little bit more into it. Starting off, I'm going to play a couple snippets from a podcast I watched. This is a clip from about a year ago from Tank the Tech, who is a merch guy and tour manager. I've watched some of his videos. This is the podcast, The Punk Rock MBA, from Finn McKenty. This is a conversation between Finn and Tank talking about this subject. I could explain it myself, but I think the two clips I have kind of explaining the back end from people that don't know about the music industry and how it works on the back end of like merch and other stuff with shows and productions. I think this is a perfect example. I hope they don't get mad at me for clipping this to show. I mean, this is in the context of explaining this. I don't think they would care, but for the sake of it, I'm going to just play this snippet of a conversation between the two of them, and then I will come back.
Yeah. So the bands have no advantage in this argument. The agents are just going to keep signing off on it because it's part of the standard deal, and it's such a common thing.
And they also,
now
and I don't want to get too into the weeds of it, but they also get paid on they don't get paid on merch, so they don't really care. Yeah,
like if agents got an incentive, like if they got like a bonus for getting rid of a merch fee or something, they'd get rid of them fast, right, dude. Like, business is business, and until that agent's bottom line is affected by something like this, they're not going to care,
So basically, if I understand it correctly, the issue is that, well, there's a few issues, but the main one being that because there isn't anyone, there aren't enough artists who are willing to take a stand on this or able and just say, we're going to boycott any venue that wants a cut of merch. There aren't enough of these artists who would be willing to take that stand, that it basically isn't going to change.
It won't change. I'm telling you right now, like, I know there's petitions in the UK that have been going around where venues are signing things saying we're not going to take merch fees. At least in North America, I don't see it happening. And one of the big things, like you just brought up, I've kind of gotten in comment sections on Instagram about this because I see other big artists that chime in and they're like, yeah, like people that are verified on Instagram, like bands that are big arena touring bands that will chime in and be like, yeah, venues are stealing from us. And I want to be like, dude, you know how this works.
Yeah.
Like, it's in your contract. Don't feed this narrative, But then I've seen other smaller bands that have been like, dude, I hear what you're saying. Like, we should not play these venues. But for a smaller band like us, we can't afford to not have this venue to play a show at. So in a lot of cases, these bands are stuck with the only option of playing a show in their local area at a venue that requires a merch fee.
So, like, what Tank the Tech is basically saying in this clip from the beginning of what I played is agents aren't, like, incentivized for getting more money from their clients, because the standard deals for most of these bands being booked, either it be bigger acts, which usually always will have a merch cut since it's such a huge ordeal. They literally don't have any other option but to do merch cuts because it's such a huge ordeal and so many people involved, and also that the actual venues themselves facilitate way more like amenities for those acts. So I'll get into that later, but mainly like mid-tier bands, those deals are just standard, so agents have no incentive to like figure out a better merch cut for them. So that just leads the bands having to basically just deal with it, and they don't really have a choice for the most part, because it's either you play this venue that there's a merch cut, or like you're gonna have to find another venue, which is gonna be hard to deal with, or what, play a house show or something. Like it's basically a lose-lose situation for smaller bands, and also compounded with the fact that they said in the clip that if everyone banded together to boycott or like, I would say unionize, but not unionize, in a way it would be everyone collectively bargaining with the industry to set a standard that, hey, you can't take these merch cuts, and or you need to figure out where to get the other money that you're taking from us from something else. You know, either it'd be a cost associated with the shows or figuring something else out. But for the most part, there's just not enough people that will stand up to argue the fact, because it's one of those situations where it's biting the hand that feeds, basically. And most of the bands don't want to like make a ruckus or like cause an issue. Probably because maybe they're doing okay and some bands aren't making as much. But for the most part, it's just collectively getting everyone on the same page is so extremely hard, especially with different personalities. I mean, like, look at someone like, say, Ronnie Radke. Imagine trying to get him to like collectively deal with other musicians and work together. All he does is basically fight every other band or musician and think he's like the best person in the world because he's such a narcissist. But like, you know, it's gonna be hard, and it might happen one day, but I just don't know when. Also, the other context in the clip at the end of what they were talking about is basically how he mentions bands that he knew or knows that have like come out and been like, yeah, they're taking our merch cuts, man. And these are like bigger acts, say Live Nation bands, or, you know, maybe a little bit under the tier of like doing full Live Nation tours. But it's funny because a lot of them will come out, you know, it's one thing where you want to appreciate the solidarity, but also like their contracts are already figured out with a lot of those merch cuts to where they're still making a decent profit, because when you're that much bigger of an act, you have a lot more sway with like your deals, and or if you are actively involved with some of the booking with your management and your agents and stuff. So like these smaller bands don't have as much of a luxury of like figuring out their merch cuts and like, you know, making something that'll work for them, maybe on a bigger scale. I mean, I don't know exactly how it works with bigger tier bands with like booking stuff, but I do know that they probably have more say. And I've seen that in some of the pricing as far as merch goes. To be honest, full disclosure, I have sold merch for bands. I've been hired like locally here in Portland to like just sell for bands, and I get paid like a small fee, or like I get tips and stuff. So, and that's another subject to talk about as far as the tipping for merch peoples, which might be a separate thing. But to stay on topic with this, basically this whole snippet that they're talking about, and to the larger, you know, problem with the music industry is with this merch cuts and stuff is, yeah, it's not very fair. But, I mean, I guess I'll get into some of the aspects of maybe why venues and some of these companies argue the fact that this is why they do it. So let's go ahead and jump into that. So looking at some notes I wrote, so for context, here's a couple little things about, you know, venue and costs. Historical context. Traditionally, venues manage expenses such as rent, utilities, staff wages, and licensing fees. These costs were relatively stable, allowing venues to maintain consistent pricing for events. In reality, however, recent years have been significant increases in expenses like rent and utilities. According to a 2022 report by the Drinks Business, operating costs in the hospitality sector have risen to 55.2% of turnover before rent, the highest level since 2007. And that's from the Drink Business. Also noting that staff wages, the pandemic led to a labor shortages, prompting venues to offer higher wages and attract and retain staff. Additional costs, enhancing security measures, increasing insurance premiums, compliance with health regulations have further strained budgets. These escalated costs have forced venues to seek additional revenue streams to remain operational. So, like, taking that into account, that is, there is a expected cost to like running a venue, running a business. That's understood by most people. I don't think people would necessarily be, so against these costs if they really knew what went into the back end of like even putting on these productions. And I've done work for production at venues, and I do see, the need for some sort of costs from taking cuts from stuff, I guess. But it just seems like if you can take a small percentage from the actual acts that are already having a set, deal for even performing there, why wouldn't you kind of incorporate those costs into the actual like numbers you're making for the show, instead of like on the side nickel and diming the bands and pulling money from them directly, when a lot of these costs, like people have noted, and one of the articles I'll get into about Jeff Rosenstock talking about merch cuts, how he basically exposed a lot of the venues, their cuts that they took. A lot of these costs end up going to like the big companies like Live Nation, AEG, that are probably the ones who are, making the standards of taking these merch cuts. So it's like, a lot of people will see it as like they're just nickel and diming people, and it's probably not even really needed. So let's get into this other article where it's basically, this is from Consequence Sound. It's a music website. There's a whole piece they did. Jeff Rosenstock exposes merch cuts taken at venues. Some venues are taking 20% or more of merch sales, which is most of the ones I've seen from some venues that I've worked at is, somewhere between 10 to 20%, which is like about, an average. So in this article by Eddie Fu from Consequence of Sound, Jeff Rosenstock has broken down the exorbitant merch cuts being taken by some venues on his upcoming North American tour. This is from a year or so ago. It's from his last tour. And he'll explain why he'll have to charge more at certain dates and critique the corporations that control the touring act industry. Here are the merch cuts being taken by the venues on his upcoming tour. Rosenstock wrote in a caption on Instagram post with the breakdown: "This is going to cause us to sell our merch for higher prices than we'd like at certain venues. We think this stinks or sucks." Rosenstock specifically targeted big corporations like AEG and Live Nation, which, if you don't know who they are, they're obviously, everyone knows Live Nation, but AEG is another bigger company that does a lot of show booking and promoting. They're almost on par with Live Nation, but they're kind of under. Some people think they're not as bad as Live Nation. Some people, think that they're, part of the problem too. But that being said, many of the types of the venues that we play during the pandemic, dodging these super high cuts is nearly impossible. Obviously, because during COVID, people were, trying to take more money from the acts to make up for the, lost costs of what they were making because of COVID. It goes more into basically explaining why it's bad. And then also he said some of the worst offenders of Rosenstock's tour included New York City's Terminal 5, DC's 930 Club, which I've heard a lot about, Boston's Roadrunner, Atlanta's The Masquerade, which is funny. I just saw a friend of mine doing photos at that venue. Shout out to Jeremy Maguire from Machinist, all of which have taken 20% of the cuts. Anyways, so This is funny. There's a response from Steve Albini. Rest in peace, Steve Albini. Claim merch cuts are 100% negotiable to the extent that many bands over 40 years have never, not once, ever paid them. Instead, artists have to push back against their agents. Yeah, but like, that's easier said than done. But also, you're Steve fucking Albini. Like, you're like a legend, so of course they're gonna listen to you. Other bands, including Car Seat Headrest, Sweet Pill, some other like bands, Equipment, that's funny. They've all chimed in with their own experiences explaining the merch cuts, and this is from the band Sweet Pill. A majority of the money we earn from touring is from merch, which when we have to pay back to a lot of venues, the music industry is broken. Thanks for sharing, Jeff. So he has an actual chart he posted on Instagram breaking down, it's an Excel sheet, breaking down the merch cuts. Like DC 20% on soft. So basically soft goods, like taking a percentage of that is just like shirts and like sweaters and just soft, like materials. And then venue sale. So they did a venue sale, which basically it works how some venues will have in the contracts with the acts, and usually it'll be at all shows. They'll have a venue sale where, bigger like stadiums, say the Blazer Stadium, Moda Center, where I live in Portland. They have their own company that does all the selling for the show. So when the tour shows up, they just basically hand them all their stuff and sell all the merch, and then they count out the numbers, and then the person who usually would sell at a smaller show just gets to hang out. So like part of that, some of the cuts make sense because they're doing a service for you. They're actually selling your product. They're offering a lot other things technically. So like those cuts make sense in a way. But 20% on soft and then 10% on hard, that's like quite a bit still. In New York, 25% and then an 8% tax. So they're also taking into account taxes on everything. And then a couple spots where they're right here, New Haven, Connecticut, none. Richmond, none. So there's some spots where they probably just didn't take a cut because it was probably a smaller venue. Atlanta, 20% soft. Nashville, 15% soft. 10% have sold out. So there is also a cut that basically says if you sell out, we will only take 10%, because it's like guaranteeing if you sell out this venue, we'll make a deal with you, we'll only take 10%. Which I have a little bit more leniency with venues that offer sellout kind of deals with like shows, where they basically have a deal where if you can guarantee that you can sell out the venue, you basically will not have to pay a certain fee, or we'll give you like a more percentage or more money back. Chicago 10%, Detroit 20%, 10% on hard. So it looks like it ranges between all these. These all look like normal numbers technically from like the industry, obviously, but I mean he's also commenting to the fact that the argument for the cut is, well, fucko, we give you a place to sell your merchandise. By that logic, we should also be getting a cut of the bar for bringing hundreds of thousands of people and their cash to the venue that night. For the record, we're 100% down to give merch cut. Any night we get a cut of the bar, but the thing that makes the most sense is that we don't take each other's money. We like each other and we're working together and helping each other. It makes no sense at the end of these killer shows why we're all having a nice time. Someone who was our friend all night low-key robs us and goes, have a safe trip to the next gig, buddies. That's fucking weird. So that was a quote from Jeff Rosenstock. So much of the time, all the money goes to the big corporations like AEG and Live Nation. Seems like the fucking rule now. If you work in a creative field, you're supposed to feel lucky and happy enough to be there, to get raked over the coals by millionaires and billionaires who give you a small slice of the pie that they can perpetually show growth and profits. It's never these people left holding the bag. It's either a musician, a field in which if you make a poverty wage, that's considered making it, or fans who have to take on the burden. Even if you're older now, I think many of us know what it feels like. Well, that show costs $30, so I can't afford to go. It's fucked up that someone to whom $1,000 is nothing is taking the money from you, for real. So this is him complaining about this, and from for most of this, I never really saw too much backlash, except Steve Albini. Yeah, Steve Albini with the weird takes. I mean, explained socialist Steve Albini usually. Admitted merch cuts are 100% negotiable. This is what I quoted earlier. They don't care about ticket surcharges, merch cuts, or other leaks. They don't affect their cut. The band has to insist. So it's kind of a place of privilege for him to explain, hey, it's like 100% negotiable and you can like work it out. But like a lot of acts and a lot of bands don't really have that luxury. Here's another clip I'm going to play with Tank the Tech and Finn McKenty on the Punk Rock MBA podcast from about a year ago, explaining kind of like what if bigger artists make a big stink about this, like Taylor Swift or something, to like bring light to it. And Tank the Tech kind of explains kind of like why that might not work, but then also he breaks down merch cuts for like bigger acts.
Like I said, it would be impossible to get every band to just boycott all these venues. It would be impossible.
Right.
So
do you think if someone like Taylor Swift was to like really put her foot, Taylor Swift or Drake or someone like that, but Taylor seems to be the one that, sort of takes a stand on these things. Do you think that would change anything?
I think it would. I think it would bring the conversation to a bigger audience for sure. Here's the problem with an artist like Taylor Swift compared to a club band, though. And this is something that needs to be brought up too. And I apologize I didn't bring this up sooner. There are different situations with merchandise. A lot of these bands that are complaining, rightfully so, are playing in clubs where the venue does nothing for them. Right. They just say, there's your corner, set up your stuff, sell it, and at the end of the night, we're taking 20%. An artist like Drake or Taylor Swift or any like arena touring band, these arenas
do stuff.
They have merchandise teams. So my day working merchandise for a club band is drastically different than, say, if I was out doing an arena tour, because in a club, I do everything. I set up, I sell, I physically do everything all day. In an arena, all the merchandise on the tour gets counted in with the arena's merchandise staff. And then once you agree on numbers, that merchandise is theirs for the day. They set up multiple stands. They sell everything, they display everything. Then at the end of the night, you count out what's left and they cut you a check. So essentially, a merchandise manager on an arena or stadium tour has become an accountant at this point.
Right.
And the team at the venue literally does all the work all day. So in that case,
and it's totally fair to take a percentage for that.
You have to pay that staff that's working at the arena because that's how they make their money, from that merchandise fee. So in that situation, I have no problem with merchandise fees.
So he basically is explaining that, it does make sense to facilitate some sort of fee because these people are actually working, doing all the work for like the bigger acts, like, or, bigger amphitheaters where they're selling merch for the tour. It makes sense that, who's going to pay that cost to those workers? Is it the venue just eating the costs like up front and just paying the people to do that? It's basically they're using the money from the tour and their merch cut to basically pay those people to do the sales, which most people, if you look at like people on tour who are like selling merch for a band, they're getting paid a certain wage and then also making tips. Usually, and then also that's, like I said, that's another conversation of bands thinking that merch sellers don't even deserve tips, which that's even a broader conversation about tipping culture in general and how there shouldn't be any kind of tipping, because if you just facilitated better wages for people, they wouldn't really need to rely on normal people to subsidize tipping them. So, like I said, that's a different conversation. But to get back to this, like the bigger acts, like the fees they're paying make sense. But at the grander scheme of everything, it's the smaller acts and the smaller touring bands that are really taking the brunt of, losing money to these companies that make a lot of the money already. So, the broader conversation for this whole topic is like, how do you basically get to a point where you can, find a middle ground where maybe bands can feel like they're not being taken advantage of, and also that the companies putting on the shows, feel like they're making enough money? Is it just pure greed on their part? Is it actual statistics of things that they have to explain, but they don't explain why they're taking these cuts, except for the fact of, like cost of stuff and venue, blah, blah, blah. They don't ever really show any transparency is what the issue that people have. If they put out a comprehensive, most of them put out like exactly why they're doing this exactly and broke down the numbers, I think most people wouldn't have a problem with it, but it just seems very predatory or exploitative. So we're going to get into that with here's another subject. There was a campaign that Live Nation did called On the Road Again initiative in September of 2023. Basically, it was a huge PR campaign they did to show that, hey, we're not going to take merch cuts and we're going to be like really cool about it. So like right here, it says, Loudwire, this is from a Loudwire article I'm reading. Loudwire and other outlets reported the news that the concert conglomerate would use the effort to stop charging bands a percentage to sell their own merchandise at their shows, what are known as merch cuts, and even give the artists participation an extra $1,500 in cash for gas and travel. But critics such as the National Independent Venue Association, NIVA, subsequently pointed out the details in the fine print that said makes the program a non-starter at the best and a detriment at worst. For most independent venues, in fact, Live Nation will only employ the On the Road Again initiative for a limited time at a small amount of club venues, and NIVA has claimed that it will actually squeeze out other small independent venues. So this is basically a huge PR stunt to be like, hey, look, we're not like gonna take merch cuts, but really at the end of it, it really wasn't what they were preaching, which is just further solidifying that they're just trying to steal money from artists and touring acts, and they're trying to be deceptive about it. Someone said you really have to dig deep to see how few clubs we're talking about and how short the window is time-wise as far as like implementing this thing. Here's from Ryan J. Downey on Twitter. The Live Nation to drop merch cuts headliners are a bit irresponsible given that it's only a small number of venues and it's only for 90 days. And then he continued, top search results, you have to really dig deep to see how few clubs we're talking about and how short the window is. Time-wise, a lot of these otherwise great reporters unwittingly doing some PR heavy lifting here for Live Nation. Here's like a actual statement from NIVA as far as this On the Road Again initiative, which was I think originally kind of conceived with like Willie Nelson, which is kind of funny. Someone who his management and his like manager basically robbed him blind, and then he's doing the bidding for companies who are robbing other people's money. Temporary measures may appear, so this is from NIVA, temporary measures may appear to help artists in the short run, but actually can squeeze out independent venues which provide the lifeblood of many artists on thin margins. Independent venues and promoters are investing in and elevating up and coming artists every day, and NIVA is supporting those efforts nationally. The initiative announced yesterday may seem like a move to follow the lead of some independent venues. It is not that. Instead, it appears to be a calculated attempt to use a publicly traded conglomerate's immeasurable resources to divert artists from independent venues and further consolidate control over the live entertainment sector. Such as tactics threatens the viability of the small and medium-sized venues under 3,000 capacity, which still struggle to keep their doors open. Independent stages, where the majority of the artists, musicians, and comedians start their careers, are small businesses and nonprofits. They are continually facing rising costs, increased deceptive ticketing practices in the resale market, and ongoing challenges following the global pandemic. Our stages are critical to the live entertainment ecosystem and local economies, and they must survive. The economics of touring must drastically improve for the artists and independent venues. There has to be a better way. NIVA will continue to support artists and empower independent venues as we collectively find it. Tank Crimes, a smaller like punk label that I like. The mainstream music press did us all dirty yesterday by not adding for the next 90 days to every headline about Live Nation any merch cuts. I shared an article with skepticism, but still become part of the misinformation. Big PR move, everyone ate it up. So here is another, Laura Jane Grace, everyone was just like, bullshit. So this is, this is a problem that we have to deal with. in a time where, you know, things are going to get extremely worse money-wise and economy-wise because, you know, somebody won the presidency, in my opinion. It's going to squeeze people even more. There's even more power for corporations given under this new incoming administration. Not to get extremely political about this, but I mean, politics is involved in a lot of this. So it just seems like I don't know what the end goal is, and, you know, I don't know how to fix it, because the system has been churning so long with all these issues, and it seemed like people were up in arms, and, you know, Live Nation put this whole campaign out and everyone dogged it, and then, you know, everyone just kind of moved on, and it seems like forgets about it, you know, because at the end of the day, if no one's really making as loud of a statement about it and fighting for it, then, like, I don't know, not to be like super skeptical, but like, I mean, the outlooks aren't great, unless I think one thing is that a lot of these acts really need to band together to like implement changes that they want to see. I'm for that. I am totally pro that. As someone who works in the industry and also has worked merch and toured, done VIP, I technically am a hired VIP Nation for Live Nation, rep for doing VIP gigs, and for how much I understand the bad aspects of this company, there is a facility that is needed for bigger acts to be, you know, put in venues and performing for people, but it's just about, you know, those companies being held accountable for monopolizing and being predatory. And I don't think if Live Nation was a huge company that actually did the right thing and paid people accordingly, no one would have a problem with a big company like that. It's just that the more they consolidate the power and the more that they just own everything, it's just very apparent that they're doing it disingenuously and taking advantage of all these people, which has been proven time and time again. You have the federal government that was literally in Congress threatening to basically break up Ticketmaster and Live Nation, which I think would be a good thing. I think consolidating these companies to where, you know, the illusion of like, look, it's like they own all this stuff and like it makes it better. It really doesn't. It squashes competition. It squashes, you know, any other people from wanting to start their own companies. You know, that's the whole point of like the country not having monopolies. But when those companies are so deep-seated in paying off those people that make the rules, you know, nothing's going to change unless people really stand up for it. What else was I going to say? For the most part, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think would be a solution? I think there's a need for venues and agents and promoters. I think everyone needs to sit down and collectively like figure it out at some point. I don't know what that'll look like. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I think at the end of all this, if we learned from history that these big companies are going to always take advantage of you, and we need to combat that with knowledge from, you know, people that have been through the ringer and who deal with this. So, like I said, comment. Tell me what you think about on the podcast. I think you can actually comment on Spotify if you want to leave a review of the podcast or comment what you think about this topic. I feel like I want to do more episodes going over merch cuts, like more, you know, behind the industry kind of stuff from my experience and from maybe interviewing other people that have actual knowledge of it. I have some knowledge, but I'm not really in on like really big behind the scenes stuff. So yeah, my name is Trey Hannawalt. This is the Lost State Recordings podcast. I appreciate you for being here. If you've made it this far, please give us a follow. We're on our socials, Lost State Recordings. I do Twitch streams where we do music production. I also play video games and do other stuff. So if you like what you hear and you like this kind of more long form talking about certain music industry or just certain music topics, please make sure to let me know. YouTube, comment on stuff. Yeah, anyways, I hope you have a great day, and you know, you take it sleazy, all right? Cool. Catch you later.